The glass doors of Trail Innovations slid open with a quiet hiss. Employees in sharp suits rushed past with their lattes and phones, scanning badges at the security gates. Nobody paid attention to the man who stepped inside, at least not at first. "Tell me where you are watching from and what time is it? Let's begin." He wasn't dressed like them, a plain navy polo, khaki trousers, and a leather briefcase that had clearly seen better days. His beard was flecked with gray, his eyes sharp with a kind of depth that only comes from decades of experience. To him, this building wasn't just steel and glass, it was his legacy. But the first thing he heard wasn't a greeting, it was a bark. "Sir, you can't be in here. This is a private company." The security guard blocked his path, one hand already reaching for the radio. A receptionist glanced up, frowned, and whispered to her coworker. People nearby slowed down, staring, some raising their phones. The man offered a quiet smile. He reached into his briefcase, sliding out a worn access card. "I built this place," he said softly. The receptionist laughed under her breath. "Built this place? Sir, you need to leave before we call management." And just like that, the tension in the air snapped. Here he was, a man who had poured billions into creating the company that now stood before him, being treated like a trespasser in his own empire. The question is, how do you throw out the owner of the very building you're standing in, and what happens when you realize who he truly is? Jonathan Trail was not a stranger to power, though many in that lobby had no idea who they were looking at. Years ago, headlines called him the black billionaire who built the future. From a cramped apartment and a second-hand laptop, he launched Trail Innovations, a company that redefined how businesses manage data, scaled into artificial intelligence, and became one of the most profitable firms in Silicon Valley. But unlike the flashy CEOs who spent fortunes on yachts and photo shoots, Jonathan disappeared from the spotlight once the empire was secure. He still owned 60% of the company, but he gave daily operations to a polished board of directors. Out of choice, he kept his life simple: polo shirts instead of designer suits, a quiet suburban home instead of penthouses, a well-worn briefcase instead of gold watches. To outsiders, that humility made him invisible. New employees came and went, never meeting the founder, assuming the man behind Trail Innovations was someone they saw on magazine covers. They were wrong. The real man had chosen anonymity because he valued results over image. Yet anonymity has a price. Without his presence, the culture inside his company shifted. The focus on innovation slowly bent toward greed. The board enjoyed their unchecked authority, and whispers of questionable deals grew louder with each quarter. Jonathan's sudden return today wasn't about nostalgia. He had received a quiet tip, a message that the leadership upstairs was planning to sell one of Trail's most valuable subsidiaries to a foreign investment group. The deal, if it went through, would strip the company of its core technology, betraying the very principles on which Trail Innovations was founded. Billions of dollars were at stake. But more than that, it was the soul of his company on the line. That was why he walked through those doors without warning. No press, no entourage, no scheduled meeting. He wanted to see with his own eyes how deep the rot had spread. And in just a few minutes, the answer was staring back at him. The dismissive laughter, the condescending looks, the way people instantly judged him unworthy of being there, all of it revealed a culture poisoned by arrogance and blind prejudice. If the front desk treated him like an intruder, what were the executives doing behind closed doors? Jonathan knew then this wasn't going to be a polite conversation or a routine check-in. It was going to be a reckoning. The company that bore his name had forgotten who he was. And he was about to remind every last person exactly what that name meant. The tension in the lobby should have ended when Jonathan calmly presented his access card, but instead it only escalated. The guard squinted at the worn plastic and scoffed, saying it looked fake, while a few employees chuckled and whispered, recording the scene like it was entertainment. Jonathan stood quietly, refusing to raise his voice. But the more composed he became, the louder their arrogance grew. Then the head of security appeared, taller, bulkier, carrying the air of someone who enjoyed throwing his weight around. "We don't allow trespassers here," he declared. And with a snap of his fingers, two guards moved closer as if ready to escort him outside. For a moment, it looked like the founder of Trail Innovations was about to be dragged out of his own building in front of dozens of strangers. But Jonathan didn't resist. He simply studied the man with an expression that carried the weight of ownership. And it was that quiet defiance that unsettled the crowd more than shouting ever could. The first climax was here.
The humiliating possibility of being removed from the very empire he had built.
The disbelief painted across faces, as if they could not imagine who they were standing in front of. While this unfolded in the lobby, the real danger was several floors above, where the board of directors gathered behind glass doors for what they called a strategic partnership meeting. In reality, it was the final step in signing away one of the company's crown jewels, a subsidiary that held patents worth billions. The acting CEO smiled confidently, already counting the bonuses to come, while other executives nodded, eager to close the deal before Jonathan could ever interfere. They assumed he was still in hiding, detached from corporate affairs, unaware of the machinations that threatened his legacy. What they didn't know was that their arrogance was about to collide with the very man they thought absent. The second climax pulsed not in the shouting downstairs, but in the pen-scratching signatures upstairs, where betrayal was being inked into paper. The juxtaposition was striking, the founder being ridiculed in the lobby while his company was quietly stolen in a boardroom. Back on the ground floor, a manager from mid-level operations finally appeared, alerted by the commotion. He was young, ambitious, and too eager to prove himself to the executives above. He walked up, eyes scanning Jonathan from head to toe with thinly veiled contempt. "This company belongs to people who understand power," he sneered, his voice carrying across the marble as onlookers grew silent. "You think you can just walk in here like you own the place?" The irony of that sentence hung heavy, and yet no one dared to laugh. Jonathan's calm gaze didn't waver, but in that silence, the weight of corporate prejudice spoke louder than any insult. Phones captured every word, and within minutes, the video began trickling onto social media, sparking comments that wondered who this man really was. The third climax burned in that manager's arrogance, the way prejudice revealed itself so nakedly, and the way Jonathan's silence turned the entire room into an unspoken challenge. Then came the moment nobody expected. Jonathan, still surrounded by guards and doubters, reached into his pocket and dialed a single number. He didn't raise his voice, he simply said, "It's time." Within minutes, the glass doors swung open again, and a small team strode inside, lawyers in dark suits, financial advisors carrying briefcases, and aides holding thick binders marked with the Trail Innovations crest. The entire lobby froze. One of the lawyers handed the head of security a packet of documents, proof of Jonathan Trail's ownership, confirmation of his 60% stake, and the legal authority to override any board decision. The guards who only moments before had been preparing to push him out now stared wide-eyed, hands frozen at their sides. Employees whispered furiously, realization dawning that the man they had mocked was not a trespasser, but the billionaire founder himself. The fourth climax crashed like a tidal wave as the lobby erupted in disbelief. Phones rose higher, live streams caught every second, and the atmosphere shifted from ridicule to raw shock. In that instant, the narrative flipped. The man they had tried to throw away was not only legitimate, but the single most powerful figure in the building. Jonathan didn't waste time standing in the lobby proving who he was. With the documents in hand and the stunned silence of dozens of employees behind him, he walked straight toward the elevator, his entourage of lawyers and advisors moving in step. Every floor the elevator climbed, tension mounted, because everyone in that building now realized the man they had dismissed was on his way to confront the very people who thought they could erase him. When the doors slid open to the top floor, Jonathan entered the boardroom without knocking. The acting CEO froze mid-sentence, pen in hand, hovering over a dotted line that would have sealed the deal. The executives turned, faces draining of color, the arrogance they wore like armor only moments earlier slipping into panic. Jonathan set his briefcase on the table with deliberate calm, his eyes cutting across the room. "Did you think I would never find out?" he asked, his voice low, steady, yet powerful enough to silence every whisper. He laid out evidence of the proposed sale, proof that the board intended to transfer core technology to a foreign investor against company bylaws. Gasps filled the air as he revealed confidential emails, balance sheets, and even personal kickback agreements that his team had uncovered. The executives shifted uncomfortably, knowing every camera and every phone outside the boardroom was waiting for news of what would happen next. The acting CEO tried to stammer a defense, insisting it was for the company's growth, but Jonathan cut him off. Growth built on betrayal is collapse in disguise. You don't sell the soul of Hale Innovations for your own pockets. He turned to the lawyers, who produced an injunction halting the transaction immediately, signed by a federal judge and backed by his majority ownership. The deal was dead. The so-called partnership dissolved before it ever became real. That was the twist nobody saw coming.
Not just the revelation of who Jonathan Trail truly was, but the speed and precision with which he dismantled the entire scheme. But he wasn't finished. He faced the executives directly, naming those who had insulted him, those who had mocked him, and those who had forgotten the values that built the company.
From this day forward, he declared, Trail Innovations will not be run by greed, it will be run by integrity. The board sat in silence, some ashamed, some furious, but all powerless in the face of the founder's authority. Security outside the boardroom, now fully aware of their mistake, stood ready to escort out not Jonathan, but the very leaders who had tried to undermine him. Phones lit up across the company as employees shared the breaking news. The billionaire founder had returned, exposed corruption, and taken back control in a single stroke. The response was electric. Shock, fear, and admiration blending into one undeniable truth. Jonathan Trail had not only reminded them who he was, he had redefined what real power looked like. The boardroom emptied slowly, its silence broken only by the shuffle of papers and the hurried footsteps of men who once believed they controlled the future of Trail Innovations. Jonathan didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The power of truth had already spoken louder than any outburst could. As he walked back through the lobby, the same employees who had laughed at him hours earlier now stood frozen, unsure whether to apologize or simply look away. Some lowered their phones in embarrassment, others whispered to one another in awe, and a few even clapped softly as he passed. The security guard who had tried to expel him earlier stepped aside, head bowed, realizing too late the magnitude of his mistake. Jonathan paused just long enough to say, "Respect is free. It costs nothing to give, and yet it shows everything about who you are." His words landed heavy, not as a lecture, but as a reminder of the values the company had lost. Outside, the sun was setting behind the glass towers, painting the sky in shades of gold. Reporters were already gathering, the story spreading faster than wildfire. The black billionaire founder who walked into his own company and was told to leave, only to reclaim it in front of the entire world. The moment wasn't just about corporate power. It was about dignity, about how quickly people judge by appearance, and how easily they forget that true authority doesn't always wear a designer suit or arrive with flashing lights. Sometimes it walks in quietly, dressed in simplicity, carrying nothing more than conviction. For employees who witnessed the events firsthand, the day became a turning point. Many said later that it forced them to question how they looked at others, how they treated people who didn't fit the image they expected. For Jonathan, it wasn't victory in the traditional sense. It was justice, a restoration of the values that had guided him from the very beginning: innovation, fairness, and resilience. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Don't underestimate the quiet man in the room. Don't assume someone doesn't belong just because they don't fit your narrow picture of success, because one day, the person you dismiss might be the one who built the ground you're standing on. So what do you think? How often do we judge people without even realizing it? And how different would the world look if we chose respect first? That's the question this story leaves behind. If it made you think, if it made you pause, then subscribe to the channel and share this story. Because true power isn't about money or titles. It's about the courage to stand firm, even when the world forgets who you are.